Welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about the kingdom Protista. So remember, make sure you keep up with all your work. Don't get behind. Don't get lazy and slack. So if you do, you're going to get overwhelmed. So if you have any problems or any questions, let me know. You can talk to each other. You can talk to me. Don't feel like you're alone. So make sure you get help if you need to get help. Make sure you take and do your study guides. The study guides, of course, are together worth extra credit, 5 points on your test that's coming up. So make sure you do those and take care of what you need to be doing. The kingdom Protista is one of the harder kingdoms to teach. So out of all the kingdoms, it's kind of one of my favorites because there's some interesting creatures that are in it, but hard to teach because organisms that don't fit into like plant, animal, fungi, they're kind of swept together and put into this particular kingdom called Protista. Many of the organisms are very different in Protista, so I believe in the future they're going to take and separate all these organisms in these groups into different kingdoms. So for our sake now, it's a kingdom that anything that doesn't fit into plant, animal, fungi, but the organisms are eukaryotic, they're going to be swept into the kingdom Protista. There are very few common characteristics between members of this group, as you'll see, and only about 100,000 species of protistans have been described so far, but this, to many scientists, this is just a drop in the bucket. So many protists are species-specific parasites. That is, they only live on certain species, and because there's a lot of other kinds of species of plants and animals, there may be lots of protists that we haven't discovered yet. They also live on the surface or inside of creatures. They're not parasitic. They don't do harm, but they may benefit by eating like dead skin cells or something like that. So they're called commensals, and they may be species specific as well. So the number of protists ultimately probably is going to be really, really super high, and much more than the 100,000 that we know of today. Just take a minute and think about what is a protist. Have you ever studied this? Did you study this in some other science class? So what exactly is a protist? Well, we're going to list a certain number of characteristics here. Again, protist, the kingdom protist, if it doesn't fit in another kingdom, it's swept into kingdom Protista. So they don't share a lot of common characteristics, but I'll share with you just a few of the characteristics that they may share in common. They all are eukaryotic, so they all have cells that are complex. They have a nucleus. They have membrane-bound organelles like the mitochondria, chloroplast perhaps. They do have smooth endoplasmic reticulum, rough endoplasmic reticulum. So these are very complex cells. They can be unicellular or multicellular depending upon the organism. Some have cell walls, while others of them lack those structures. So some of them have cell walls, others of them just have the plasma membrane. Protists seem to lack tissues, organs, and systems, so they don't have super complex structure like modern day animals. But just because they lack tissues, organs, and systems doesn't mean they're complex. These are very, very highly sophisticated cells making up these organisms. They do different kinds of things metabolically. Some of them are autotrophic, some of them are heterotrophic. So autotrophic means they feed themselves using sunlight, so photosynthetic. Some of them are heterotrophic, which means they have to eat other living things. Many of them are saprophytic, which means they're decomposers. They, dump enzymes on their food and then absorb the nutrients that they've digested with their enzymes. Some of them are really crazy strange. They're mixotrophic. They eat when sunlight, they will eat when sunlight is not available, or they'll undergo photosynthesis when sunlight is available. So they can switch between being heterotrophic and autotrophic. So they're called mixotrophic. They have many different kinds of ways of modes of transportation. So they can sometimes, like Paramecium here, use cilia, little extensions from the cell membrane that have the ability to move the organism around. Some of them creep around, like Amoeba has these little pseudopods, which are just extensions of the cell membrane that help it to kind of like walk around using those little extensions, or kind of creep around, I guess would be a better way of stating that. Many of these protists have flagella, and these are whip-like structures. Sometimes they have one, or they might have more than one flagella. So Euglena would be an organism, a protist that has a flagellum, and it uses that whip-like motion to move itself around. Now, others of them can actually be sessile. So they actually sit and on the bottom. So sessile means that they sit on the bottom, and they use their the little attachments to hold steady on rocks or other substrates, and then and just sit there their whole lives. Others of them use water currents to actually move themselves around. So the wind or waves will blow them around, and that's how they get from one place to another. Modes of reproduction in protists can be really complex, and it can be simple. They do have asexual reproduction, where they make copies of themselves or spores, and those spores will create new protists. Sometimes the organisms will use sexual reproduction. They'll use gametes, sperm cell and egg cell like structures that will allow them to do genetic recombination and make new offspring. Many of the protists, though, have mixtures of both. They have asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction, and so they can utilize different modes of reproduction, and they'll switch based on the environments. If the environment's really hospitable, maybe they'll use sexual reproduction. If it's very, very inhospitable, maybe they'll use asexual reproduction. So it just depends on the environment. Protists do mainly live in aquatic environments, and this includes saltwater and freshwater. Saltwater environments we also call marine environments, so they're usually have to be aquatic. Anywhere there's water, there's probably going to be protists. So some live in damp soil, others of them live in your blood. Maybe you've had a protistal infection somewhere inside your body before. They can live underneath animal skin, as we'll see in coral animals, and many of them live in moss plants or associated with fungi in these really cool structures called lichens. So they live in a wide variety of areas, and it just depends on the particular species. Now, the classifications of protists is quite confusing. It's hard to teach because, you change the textbook and it changes the phylogeny of these creatures. So it's not widely agreed upon. It's in flux. As we do more DNA sequencing of species, we're seeing relationships more clearly, and we're changing the cladograms that we build. The cladogram that you see on the right-hand side of your screen has tried to group these organisms that we call protists into monophyletic groups. For example, you can see this is a monophyletic group. They all share a common ancestor with each other. So this is not a widely agreed upon cladogram. It's the one that's used in our textbook, so it's the one we'll talk about briefly. I don't expect you to remember all of these different exotic named groups. So, and the reason is that this is in flux, it's changing. And so what I did was I selected from these groups, I selected a few organisms that I find to be interesting and important protists. And those are the ones that I want you to know about, not necessarily these particular names. So instead of going over each of the groups, I have selected a few important and interesting ones, interesting to me and important in terms of medical and economic impact that they have. So let's start with talking about the slime molds. I picked slime molds because slime molds are something that you oftentimes see, but you never probably knew what you were looking at. So this slime mold here is oftentimes seen on mulch. Maybe after a rain and when it gets warm, you'll sometimes see something that almost looks like maybe dog vomit or some kind of animal vomit. And what it is it's actually a plasmodial slime mold. It's a colony of protists that is forming a reproductive structure. Now, plasmodial slime molds typically they will move across the mulch eating organisms as they go along, and then when it gets to a point where they need to reproduce, they form these structures there, and it's kind of got a beautiful yellow, sometimes orange color. It will dry up and form spores, and the spores will be released into the air to form more slime molds, plasmodial slime molds. This particular slime mold over here is a cellular slime mold. These slime molds actually exist as unicellular structures, but when they go to reproduce, all the unicellular members of the group will actually take and form a slug, and it's just a collection of all the bodies of those cells. They'll actually take and differentiate into different parts. Some parts of the slug will form a stalk. They'll actually sacrifice their bodies, form a stalk, and then others will form a sporangium and produce spores, which the air currents will take away. So these are just kind of interesting in that a lot of scientific studies being done on them right now, and I have a little video that you'll see in a minute that or that you can look at online that talks about how perhaps they're very intelligent creatures. So this is just a life cycle of a slime mold. So we'll start up here with looking at the spores. So spores are haploid. Remember, haploid from 101 means they have one set of chromosomes, and they're produced in the process called meiosis. So the sporangium over here is going to have cells that undergo meiosis to produce the spores. The spores are released into the wind. They germinate into these little amoeboid cells. These little amoeboid cells will actually fuse together and they'll form a zygote, and those cells will begin to undergo cell division. What's interesting about the slime mold is the cells will undergo cell division without cytokinesis, so they keep on creating nuclei inside of a mass that grows. So this particular organism is diploid, and it actually has multiple nuclei, and it just forms a mass. That mass is what you see when you see it on your mulch at home. This is the mature Plasmodium. When it undergoes asexual reproduction, it produces the sporangium up here, and then it will produce the spores. Okay, so that's the plasmodial slime mold. This is the cellular slime mold. As I told you earlier, these cells will hatch out of spores, and they will be free living and amoeboid. They'll move around in amoeboid movements, just kind of creeping around. They'll sometimes all come together and then form a slug. The slug will move around, and eventually it will form the stalk and the sporangium, and cells inside the sporangium will undergo meiosis to produce haploid spores. So kind of an interesting little life cycle there. Take a look at this video, and I don't know what you think how you define intelligence, but these plasmodial slime molds, they can actually solve mazes. So take a look at that. I posted it on Blackboard for you. So let me know what you think about that. Another really important group of protists are the green algae. And there's all different kinds of green algae. We have Chlorodemonas and Chlamydomonas. We have sea lettuce. I like to see these at the beach when I go to the beach. We have charophytes. These are very closely related to green plants and almost kind of look like green plants. They're multicellular and very important in aquatic environments. This happens to be Spirogyra, just a type of green algae that I find to be kind of cool looking, and Volvox is one of the coolest algae as well. Green algae, the reason I put them here is because I consider them to be important because they're part of the food web. So they're the base of the food web in many aquatic environments. So they are going to undergo photosynthesis and produce food for organisms. They produce lots and lots of oxygen for us to breathe. And so these are really, really super important at also at regulating climate, perhaps. Many of these algae cells will absorb carbon dioxide, and when they die, the carbon that's become part of their body settles to the bottom of the ocean and becomes part of the sediments, and it traps carbon. So these are really important creatures for you to be aware of. Another important protist that I thought you might like to know about is the water mold. This one called Phytophthora infestans has been responsible. It's the causative agent of a disease that affects potatoes. And I put the organism, what it looks like down here under the microscope, but these things will actually grow on the surface of potatoes and it will actually rot potatoes. So you can see the the infections that these potatoes have on the surface, and then it goes internally as well. Um, so these have killed millions and millions of people, not by causing disease directly, but because some people in the past have had monocultures where they only eat one type of food. When these blights go through, they will cause the starvation amongst people because they're plant pathogen. So millions and millions of people have actually died when potato crops have failed. In terms of our country, we're a nation of immigrants, and some of the migration of say, people like the Irish people, they came across in millions of refugees from where their potato crops have failed. So this is a really important one to our nation. It's made our nation stronger by the immigrants that have come and worked here, and but they, were seeking a better life because of the pathogen killing their crop. Dinoflagellates are really, really interesting, and these are marine plankton. These are algae cells that live in saltwater environments, and they form the base of the food chain and food webs. So they're really important because living creatures eat them. They're eaten by clams and scallops and filter feeders, which are fed upon by other living organisms. They can be problematic though. There's natural red tides and there's abnormal or human-caused red tides. So if you look at the color of the water there, it's red, and that's because of the pigments that are inside the bodies of billions and billions of dinoflagellates. Now, these red tides, they can be very problematic sometimes. These dinoflagellates sometimes produce toxins that kill marine organisms. Some strandings of whales have been linked to toxins that the whales are taking in from red tides. I actually swam in a red tide one time in Virginia Beach, and I didn't know it, and it just kind of floated towards me, and I got out of the water after I noticed that. But I wasn't affected by the nerve toxins. At least I don't think I was affected by them. Um, these dinoflagellates can grow in huge numbers, and one reason that they can cause these red tides, or one cause of red tides, is by human sewage or fertilizer flowing into the water. So if we over fertilize our lawns, or we have raw sewage dumped into water, that's food for these dinoflagellates, and they'll grow in huge numbers and cause problems. Another reason red tides are kind of dangerous is that a lot of times sunlight can't penetrate through the algae mats that are formed, so that blocks sunlight from feeding from allowing underwater plants to undergo photosynthesis. If underwater plants die, that kills oxygen production, it kills food, it kills the little nursery ground that small fish live in to survive from bigger predators. So there's a lot of reasons why these red tides are really important. Economically, they're important too, because you can't collect shellfish or harvest shellfish. Fishermen can't when these red tides happen, because you don't want to feed people shellfish that have these dinoflagellates inside of them. So there can be different kinds of diseases like shellfish amnesia that can be caused from the poisons that come out of these dinoflagellates. So we have to be, economically, it's pretty important. It's really important not to feed the lawn and to have sewage going into the water. I beg my wife every year, please don't make me fertilize the lawn. She likes to have green grass, because I know that when it rains, it's going to flow that fertilizer into the little stream that we have on our property. So I also hate feeding my lawn because it makes it grow really fast, which makes it have to be mowed a lot. And I don't care much for yard work personally. So this is kind of cool. Dinoflagellates are responsible for creating bioluminescence. This happens to be a little shoreline here with waves crashing. Every time the wave crashes, it causes the dinoflagellates to emit light in this process called bioluminescence. If you ever swim in the ocean at night, I've done this before. The little organisms, every time you touch them, they will create bioluminescence. I think it's a survival adaptation. Because these dinoflagellates don't want to be eaten by fish at night. If they glow, then whatever is swimming around near them and eating them is now able to be detected by its predators. So it's kind of a cool little adaptation to allow for the survival of the dinoflagellates. So cool organisms for sure. Another kind of dinoflagellate called Zooxanthellae, these dinoflagellates are living inside of coral animals. The coral animal actually eats them, but the dinoflagellate goes across and enters into their epidermis and actually sits inside their epidermis. And they live there as symbionts. Symbionts is a term we use for an organism that lives inside another organism in a mutualistic relationship. So you can see down here in this picture of these coral animals, there's all kinds of zooxanthellae living inside of right underneath their skin. Now, this makes them, the coral animals kind of like photosynthetic. So the zooxanthellae, they produce food from photosynthesis that feeds the coral animal. The coral animal will give the zooxanthellae a home. It'll give it carbon dioxide, and so a space to live. So this is a very, very important symbiotic relationship. So the reason that this relationship's interesting to humans is that coral, actually starts a food web in a coral reef. It actually forms the coral reef. So we have lots of people that fish from coral reefs, that derive their protein or nutrition from coral reefs. So to have a healthy reef, you have to have the zooxanthellae algae living in the coral animals. Now these coral animals are animals. They have tentacles with stinging cells, and they actually will take and paralyze smaller prey and eat them. They do have a mouth anus, so the food comes in, it's digested, and then the anus, the waste products come out. So they're a really interesting animal. If you've never swam in the coral reefs, they're quite beautiful. So here is a healthy, beautiful coral reef, and you can see there's multiple colors there because there's different species of zooxanthellae living inside of them. Whenever you see white coral, that's actually not a good sign. That's a sign that there's no algae living inside of the animals. So this is a nice healthy reef. This is what a reef looks like though when you have coral bleaching. So on the left-hand side of this panel here, you have December 2014. This was right before a coral bleaching event occurred. Here's February 2015, just several months later. You have this is several months later. This is what happens when you have a coral bleaching event. Coral bleaching is thought to be caused by warming ocean water. Now, I don't know what you know about global warming, but because humans are putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, more and more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because of burning fossil fuels, we are changing the chemistry of the atmosphere and causing it to warm up. As that warming occurs, we actually get these coral bleaching events that happen. So what happens is when the temperature of the water increases, it's thought that the coral have to dump the algae out in order to change the way it's metabolizing. So it dumps the algae out, and when it dumps the algae out, it basically sets itself up to being white like this. But then also it sets itself up to eventually dying. Now, a bleached reef doesn't mean it's a dead reef yet. So the coral animals can possibly heal themselves if the environmental conditions allow them to bring algae back in. So this is a pretty serious event. If you look at the coral bleaching in, say, the Great Barrier Reef in Australia, it's killing a lot of that reef. And there will be an economic impact for those folks that live there, both for tourism and for harvesting species for food. So it's something to think about and to be serious about. Part of your education is hopefully learning about things that we're doing to negatively impact the world, and hopefully thinking of solutions to solve these problems. Paramecium is an interesting creature. I just thought I'd put it there so you could see it. It's one of the most complex cells that there are. And I'm going to show you a little video while we're watching a video and see if this actually works. I believe it'll work. And I just wanted to show you, I'm going to go through and fast forward this, how complex these cells are. You can take a look at this, in a little bit longer view if you want to. This is a minute or so. But I want you to take a look at some of the serious complexity that these cells have. In this particular video, it's showing you how they feed. So they do have an oral groove, and they have cilia that brings food in, and they create little food vacuoles. You can see a little food vacuole over here. They bring the water in, they filter out food, put it into a food vacuole, and that's what they use to digest. If you notice on the outside surface, you can see the little cilia moving around. But this is a very, very sophisticated, highly adapted cell. So I don't want you to think of protists as being, just because they don't have tissues and organs and systems, as being simplistic. These are as complex as any cell that you have in your body, if not more complex. This cell right here can live as one cell. It can live perfectly fine as one cell, whereas it takes you trillions and trillions of cells, maybe 30 trillion cells, to make up your particular body. So I don't want to take up too much time looking at this, but it is a beautiful organism. It is an amazing organism, very sophisticated, very complex, and very well adapted to its environment. And it's called Paramecium. Let's see if I can go ahead and exit the screen and go over to Amoeba. So Amoeba is another super sophisticated organism. I had another little video clip here I'd show you of it moving around. You can see the pseudopods growing here. These little false feet, pseudopod means false feet, are little extensions of the cytoplasm. So it has the ability to extend out and move around. It can engulf prey and bring that prey in. You can see various food vacuoles inside here. So it creeps around, and it's an amazing organism. Very complex, very well adapted to its living conditions that it finds itself in aquatic environments. So amazing creature, the amoeba. So let me talk about a couple of medically significant protists. I'll talk about Plasmodium first. Plasmodium is the genus name. There are many different species of the parasite that causes malaria. Plasmodium happens to be the genus of that. So this particular organism is found inside of infected blood cells. So if you see, these are all red blood cells here, and the little parasites are these little purple structures that you can see here and here. So these will destroy blood cells. They'll destroy liver cells. They are carried by mosquitoes. So you can see the mosquito there. That's a female mosquito. You can see the little mouth part there, the little proboscis that's sticking its proboscis through the skin there. I don't know if you think of a mosquito as being a venomous animal, but it is a venomous animal. It injects saliva into you that stops your ability to feel the sensation. It spits digestive enzymes in that help to, and anticoagulants in that help it to take and feed on a blood meal. You can see the blood is pooling inside of this female mosquito. Males don't actually suck on blood. Many of the males are pollinators. They actually drink nectar, not blood. The reason the female bites you is to harvest blood cells, and she uses that protein to make egg cells, so to make her eggs nice and strong. These mosquitoes are found in Africa and other places in not aquatic, but in terrestrial areas that are hot and humid. My cat just jumped up to say hello. This is Becky. Say hi, Becky. So I'm gonna put you back down on the floor now. All right. So sorry about that disturbance there. Becky is a parasite for sure. These mosquitoes are found in equatorial regions, and as that temperature of the Earth begins to climb a little bit through global warming, we expect to see more and more of these mosquitoes expand their range, both in latitude and altitude. So these mosquitoes are going to be found at higher and higher mountaintops, spreading these malarial parasites. That's something to be concerned about and thoughtful of. So it has a super complex life cycle. I don't expect you to know the life cycle, but it's just amazing how complex nature actually is. It took a long time to figure out the sequence of how it actually lives. So here we have a human that's bitten by the mosquito. The mosquito will transmit itself into the liver cells. It transmits itself into blood cells at certain stages of its life. So it can destroy the liver cells. It can destroy blood cells. So because blood cells are being destroyed very, very quickly and it's damaging the liver, oftentimes a person will turn yellow and have jaundice from that. At some point, the mosquito will come re-pick up the parasites and transmit them to other humans when they bite other humans. This is a big problem in some areas. There are millions of people that die from the malarial parasites, and it weakens people as well. So they're very sick people. Bill and Melinda Gates and using the Bill and Melinda Gates Fund are trying to eradicate malaria by creating a vaccine. They haven't done it yet, but they're in the process of trying to figure out how to eradicate this. People in equatorial regions use mosquito netting and they spray for mosquitoes to try to knock down their populations. Another human parasite is that I wanted to talk to you about is Trypanosoma brucei. And this is the very, very, very dangerous parasite that's found in equatorial regions of Africa. It's carried by this fly called the tsetse fly or tsetse fly, and this is a very common fly. You can see it has a nice big proboscis, and this female fly is having a nice blood meal that it's drinking here. So as the fly goes from host to host, parasitizing it, drinking blood, it spreads the Trypanosoma parasite. These are very advanced and very complex parasites. These parasites don't have as complex a life cycle as malaria does. The tsetse fly, the tsetse fly or tsetse fly will inject the parasite into a human. It multiplies. It grows in blood, lymph, and spinal fluid. Lymph fluid is a type of fluid that goes through your lymphatic vessels, and it goes into your brain. So it does cause your neurological problems and even death. It does cause the disease called African sleeping sickness because it does cause irregular sleep patterns. But again, I don't need you to know the life cycle. If you want to memorize it, that's fine. It's really cool. But I just wanted you to see that it does have a life cycle where it infects humans and spreads itself from human to human. Another interesting but not deadly, just annoying parasite is Trichomonas vaginalis. And this is the causative agent of trichomoniasis. This is a sexually transmitted infection that's spread from unprotected sexual contact. In females, it causes vaginitis, swelling of the vaginal canal, irritation and inflammation of the vaginal canal. In males, it causes urethritis, and this is a condition where the urethra, the tube that transmits sperm cells and urine, swells up and becomes inflamed and painful. So it makes you feel like you're urinating razor blades. How do you know you have this? Well, you'll feel like you're urinating razor blades. That's not very pleasant. Plus, you can have a discharge, a yellowish, smelly discharge that comes out of the vaginal canal or the urethra. I just showed you over here on the left-hand panel. I showed you a picture of a pap smear. This is a normal pap smear from a female. This is where they go in and they harvest normal cells or harvest cells during an annual gynecological exam. And this is what they normally look like. You can see they're nice, healthy-looking cells. But if you had Trichomonas vaginalis, you can see the little internal parasites all over the cells that they scrape off of through the pap smear. Okay, so that's what it looks like. You can take medications and rid yourself of this particular nuisance. So this guy over here thinks he's drinking nice, fresh, healthy mountain water, and in reality, what he's drinking is water that has these little parasites in them that are microscopic. So you want to be real careful not to drink contaminated water. They do have at Walmart life straws, and you could use that to actually treat the water if you go backpacking or in a survival situation. Giardia lamblia is the genus species name, and it causes giardiasis or beaver fever, I like to think of it. So beaver poop in the water stream, and then they release giardia, and then this guy unknowingly drinks the water. This is an annoying, sometimes very deadly parasite that gets into your digestional tract. It causes diarrhea and abdominal pain and swelling and vomiting. And if you're in a survival situation, it can be, life-threatening. Now, it doesn't usually strike for day 1 or day 2. It usually strikes a week or so later. So in a survival situation, if you have to drink water you just don't have any other situation where you can't purify the water, I would drink it and worry about getting a contamination later. Most people are found usually in 1 to 2 days after being lost anyways in the woods. But there is a consequence to drinking that contaminated water. So be careful of Giardia. So the importance of protists are many. They form the base of food webs. They are causative agents of many human and plant diseases that have killed millions of people and caused the starvation of millions of others. Some are fungus-like, and they act as decomposers in aquatic environments. So they aid in removing and recycling dead material from aquatic environments. They live inside of coral and allow coral reefs to exist and to thrive. So many people derive their protein and nourishment from these coral reefs, and they're important for us to keep around these coral reefs. They help us to sequester carbon dioxide because the algae, they take in carbon dioxide and then they die and their bodies go to the bottom of the ocean, and so they take carbon dioxide and store it in sediments in the ocean. So these produce large quantities of oxygen and food for us. One of my favorite things to eat is seaweed. I love eating green algae, and maybe one day you'll get an opportunity to eat it as well. So that's the protist lecture, and just a little jump through protist and helping you to get to understand it just a little bit better. As usual, make sure you do all your work. Make sure you follow your due dates. Make sure you email other students and talk about this material and do your study guides and keep up to date on everything. So I wish you a good day or a good night whenever you're looking at this, and I'll see you next time.